Right? Yay. We're going to start today's agenda by asking for any bill introductions. And someone was supposed to come, and apparently they did not. We can, if they show up later, we can probably do that. As you all know, that we're wanting to have some executive sessions, so I move that the open meeting of the House Legislative Modernization be recessed for a closed or executive meeting pursuant to KSA 75-4319A to discuss subjects relating to the security measures with Jeff Maxon, Executive Branch Chief Information Technology Officer, Allie Denning, Director of Public Affairs, and John Godfrey, who is the new CISA, Chief Information Security Officer, pursuant to KSA 75-4319B12C, because the discussion is of such subject in an open meeting would jeopardize such security measures, and the committee resumed the open meeting in 218 of the State House at 9:20. You're sure that you're going to get this done? Ian, have you gotten?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Again, over the past couple of years, excuse me, it has been significantly greater the past few years than it has been, again, by getting support from the governor's office to sponsor events like her summit. They're starting to take awareness, and again, seeing it actually happen, unfortunately, getting closer to home, people are starting to realize that it's something we all need to take seriously. So again, especially when we get them involved and then start getting their direct reports that support them, such as chief counsels, et cetera, it's getting a lot better than it has in the past.
Okay, so what's your percentage to say, but would you say 7/8 of them are taking it seriously, less, or?
I would estimate we're pretty close to the 7/8, 90%.
Okay.
I mean, their participation, I said we keep attendance in what's there, and so they usually have to have pretty good excuses why they're not attending. So.
Okay. Did you had another presentation?
Yes, ma'am.
Open session. All right, you may go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, or Chairwoman. Apologize. Again, Jeff Maxon, Chief Information Technology Officer for the state of Kansas. Again, I went over a little bit of my background, so it's up here. But again, the way we're looking at IT in the state is significantly changing, and so I'm going to give you a little crash course on the IT governance in the state of Kansas, and also the functions of OITS in the security office as you look at this. I also want to introduce our new state CISO, Chief Information Security Officer, John Godfrey. Can you put the slides up for us, please?
Did you want him to introduce himself? Not?
I can get it.
Okay.
So John Godfrey is not a stranger to the state. He spent 10 years at KUMC. 6 of those were as the KUMC Chief Information Security Officer and Associate Vice Chancellor for Information Security. Recently, he had gone into the private sector and started his own consulting business and was the founder and CISO in residence for Lionheart Security in Kansas City. So again, not a stranger to the state, went through an open hiring process and went through that process. So again, excited to have him. I think you'll continue to see a lot of movement forward in how we're approaching cybersecurity from the state perspective. All right, so as I mentioned, here's a little bit of the crash course. And so IT governance exists at multiple layers within the state, and there's a little bit uniqueness, but first it starts with statute and legislative. Obviously, that sets everything for the state. With Joint Committee on Information Technology is kind of that overseeing body of IT initiatives across all 3 branches of government. Underneath the statute, I apologize. We have the Information Technology Executive Council, also referred to as ITEC, and they are established in statute. There is representation from the 3 branches, local government, private sector, legislative representation from both the House and Senate on that, and then also private sector as well. And so they're responsible for setting kind of IT direction and state level policy that all branches and all state entities have to follow. and abide by. Underneath ITech, then you have each of the three branches that can set their own policy and own directive, and then obviously on the executive branch side, agencies can set their own policies as well. But none of them can be least restrictive than the body above them. So if ITech sets the standard, a agency can't usurp the standard and say our standard is lower than what ITech has said. It needs to be higher. And so they can follow their policies over ITech as long as they're more stringent, things like that. And so with that, some of the changes we've started instituting more recently is setting like a 3-year IT strategy. That is actually in statute that all branches and all entities are to complete. And so we have focused specifically to really refine that initiative to start getting a visibility of IT across the state. In the past, everybody kind of put their own document together and submitted it. Now it is a standard form. It turns into an application that allows us to kind of search it and kind of find places where there are similarities and see if we can either get agencies talking to one another to find economies of scale, things like that. We haven't had that visibility in the past. That is something we continue to drive through. And that in turn gets published every year and then shared through like JCIT, through ITech, things like that. All right, information technology and cybersecurity, again, it's a combination of people, process, and technology. You need all of them to have a successful IT operation or successful cybersecurity operation. I'll go more into this here in a little bit, but some of them in projects, you can have things that lean more to one side. But again, it's the combination of all of them that make a successful project, and being very cognizant that cybersecurity applies at all those levels. How do we secure the people? How do we secure the processes? How do we secure the technology? And so just being cognizant of that. And then I'll talk a little bit about the 3 pillars of cybersecurity or information security, which is the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of data. And so everything we do are based on those, but there is a balancing act we have to do. So with cybersecurity, again, along those lines of people, process, technology, we are putting in controls to limit and reduce risk, and they typically fall into 3 categories. We have the managerial and administration controls, so these are your policies, these are your leadership decisions on how you're gonna move things, and then you have your operational. These are your processes and procedures. How do you carry out your businesses specifically? I make sure if I print something off, once I'm done with it, it gets shredded. Those are your operational controls, but you have to document those. And then you have your technical controls, which are your widgets and gadgets on the network. So your applications, things like that, your security tools and controls. Again, information security and cybersecurity is applied across these, and that's where you need all 3 of them working together as well. And our goal is to build something what we call a defense in depth. We want to layer as many controls in place to make it as hard as possible to get to your crown jewels or your critical assets. And I know Bob had kind of talked a little bit about this, but again, you're layering those management, operational, and technological controls across it. Now, you can't basically close it completely off so it's unusable. That's not practical, and the only secure computer is the one that's not plugged in, buried 6 feet underground, and chained and shut, and nobody can turn it on. We can't do that. That's not feasible. We can't function and carry our duties without technology. So we are inherently absorbing risk. There is no such thing as zero risk in the technology perspective. So again, our goal is to layer it. A lot of times they show the concentric circles and layered in there. I tweaked it, and I had somebody in my early days telling me you have to leave an opening in each of those circles. So there is a way in to actually you can do your job. So we want to kind of twist and turn them to make it to be the maze as hard as possible to get in without impeding the business units. So it is a challenge. Again, it is a process, and we can't always be seen as the no people because we can't stop business. So everything we do, we have to balance. Again, I mentioned the 3 pillars, and then we have to also balance with security, functionality, and ease of use. And so those shift based on your systems and what the priority is. And so I kind of use those triangles, and again, your resources is wherever your focus is. So tax system, yeah, you probably need to have very much you're focused on the confidentiality and the integrity of that data. Availability, people are always going to have to pay taxes. So having a conversation with the Division of Taxation, Department of Revenue, what are your priorities? That steers your controls. And then you have to layer them in to make sure you're achieving security, functionality, and ease of use. So it is a balancing act. It is a long conversation. This is not a short-term thing. This is always changing and evolving during the life cycle of a system because new threats come out, et cetera, and so new priorities, things like that. So again, it's a long conversation that's constantly occurring. All right, so that was your crash course on cybersecurity and IT governance. And so a little bit of background about OITS specifically and the Kansas Information Security Office. So a couple years ago, we outlined a strategic framework. It started out as just within OITS, but we've actually expanded this to the executive branch strategic framework. And in this, we cover 4 pillars: operational excellence as part of our goals, IT risk management, technology modernization, IT service driven. And so everything we're trying to do is to align with these as we carry out our mission with the agencies to support them. And then we've developed some specific outcomes with that. And so I won't read them all off, but this is something we're trying to make very publicly available. We have not done a good job over the past couple of years of publishing a roadmap or strategy for state IT. That is one of my goals and objectives. I'd done that on the security side, which had driven a lot of our decisions to expand into a true provided enterprise service. We need to do that on the IT side and then align it with the agency business needs. So from OITS, our key services kind of fall into 3 categories: technology services, professional services, and security services. On the technology service, that includes things like networking, telephony. So again, we provide the enterprise network that all 3 branches reside on. We also do have some local users out in the counties that run on our network. We also provide the telephony, so the phone systems, that is provided out to all 3 branches. Again, these are all charged for chargeback services, so we bill the agencies that use this. And then on the professional services, we have end user support, so supporting the non-cabinets and providing them their desktops, their basic IT functions, things like that. So we have a kind of a centralized environment for a lot of the non-cabs. There are still a handful that do have their own IT environments and their own IT staff, but we do provide this as a service to agencies, non-cabinet agencies. Also, under the technology services, we have our managed data center. So we have a partner, Unisys, that manages our primary data centers in Kansas do not belong to the state anymore. That was essentially outsourced back in, I think, 2018 is when that contract started, because our data centers and the land and building were getting very decrepit and weren't maintained. And so Unisys does have another data center that we use here in Kansas, and then a disaster recovery data center in Minnesota. So we do have some separation, things like that. And that is a service that we manage the contract in relationship with the vendor. They also provide a mainframe as a service, so we have a vendor that provides our old mainframe system. Expertise in that we don't have in the state anymore, so we had to find a third party to help us. And again, kind of offloading some of that risk. That was a risk-based decision. So, and then security service, and I'll cover a little bit those more. So from an IT operational structure, excuse me, again, very much kind of aligning to the governance structure. So as you see, CanWin services, which are provided by OITS across the bottom, and then each of the branches above. So again, we are providing a core level of services to all 3 branches, and then obviously on executive branch up through the agencies as well. And again, charge for services, that is how we're structured. We don't get a bunch of SGF to provide these services. We are actually a very small portion of SGF. But again, this is how IT has been structured in the state for years. And so, again, just kind of the high level. All right. So I know information and cybersecurity is one of the primary topics. So again, the Kansas Information Security Office is the agency in Kansas that is dedicated for cybersecurity. This was passed as the Kansas Cybersecurity Act in 2018, which created the Kansas Information Security Office and created the role of the Chief Information Security Officer. What it did is it basically created this office. At the time, we only had about 10 folks in the office, and we're providing basic cybersecurity services to the core OITS services. So email, network, telephony, some of the data center as a service stuff. And then if you wanted some of those advanced services, we'd provide those to agencies for a cost and have an SLA, and we'd essentially bill them. And so there was not much uptake in some of those things. And most of our operating budget, actually all of it at the time, came from those OITS fees, so we'd get a portion of the fees OITS collected. Our current state, so with the passage of House Bill 2019 last year, very appreciate working with folks on that. That authorized our office to go to 28 FTEs. One of the big things is we provided information security officers out to agencies. In the past, that was one of our build for services, and so these are kind of their consultants to help guide them on cybersecurity and information security. And again, these are typically management level individuals to help kind of, like I said, be consultants. With this, prior to, we had one who was working with the non-cabinets. That was kind of pushing the boundaries on what we should be paying for. And to this, we've actually added a second, and then we've embedded into most of the cabinet agencies and information security officers. So again, helps give our office a little visibility and helps kind of sound as that sounding board and checks and balances. Our budget is approximately $11 million now. 5.75 is from state general fund. Again, that was a big ask so we can start providing things consistently without billing folks. And then 5.25 are still some of those fees we collect off of some of the services we provide security to. And also with that, now the Chief Information Security Officer can set cybersecurity policy for executive branch. So those were big wins in kind of advancing cybersecurity governance in the state. And so I just want to, progress is being made in that. So strategic goal for at least the cybersecurity side, if you go back and look at that strategic framework, and again, it's to ensure the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of state's information technology resources. So again, focused on that CIA triad and talked about is what is our goal. And I'll kind of go into detail of our strategic outcomes. I won't read through those. But again, trying to put some strategic outcomes that kind of guide our efforts and initiatives. So coming back to our org chart, so this is, again, changed since the passage of House Bill 2019, and we were able to go out and kind of build the organization. So we're functionally built into kind of three operational functions. So it starts with the CISO as the agency head, and then we've got a deputy CISO, and then we've created this division of cyber collaboration and cyber preparedness. And again, this does report directly up to the CISO, and that's by design because this function is built on building relationships across the state. We want to look at cybersecurity as a whole of state approach. We can't fight this. We can't fight all those bad actors by ourselves. And we know the little communities and even the bigger community. I mean, we're seeing some of these companies get hit. I mean, they have exponentially more resources than us. And so we have to work together. And so we specifically created this area, and I'll go a little bit more into that. But then we have cyber operations and information assurance. So we've got the technical folks and then kind of the managerial and management folks on the information assurance side. All right. So cybersecurity operations, these are really our technical folks. They're the ones that are flipping the switches and dials and watching the screens to find anomalies. So we have security engineers and security analysts that are constantly, introducing new tools, building them out, also monitoring the environment for those anomalies. If we get alerts, we investigate to determine if we have an incident or if it's just what we call an event. And so they serve as kind of the first responders to any of those things. And a lot of times we're trying to monitor and, again, take some of this burden off the agencies. And also with this group, we also share with other states to see what is going on across the country. So some of the focus is partnerships with, again, other states that are fighting some of the similar things we are. But then again, they're also protecting that larger can-win network that we have. Information assurance, these are those information security officers I was talking about. They're charged with helping each agency build their security programs. And again, until recently, I think we only had 5 of the cabinet agencies that had subscribed for our service for security officers in the chargeback model. And since then, we've expanded where we have somebody assigned to essentially every cabinet agency, and then things like the hospitals, et cetera. And then we have 2 dedicated for all the non-cabinets, so it's, there's 40 plus non-cabinets. That's a lot of work for them. But from something where things haven't existed in the past, they're trying to build a consistent program across the board, try and make it cookie cutter so it's easy to function and stay on. They'll also help with compliance, audit assistance. They'll help conduct security assessments, introduce the concepts of information security and risk management. Again, every agency should be doing some sort of risk management program. They're here to help introduce kind of the IT and cyber risk to that risk management program, and then also serve as our liaisons between their initiatives and the security office. And as I mentioned, the cyber collaboration preparedness, this is our newest area. Again, facilitating outreach and partnerships, and then also focused on, doing the exercises, the tabletop exercises, the training. We've put together a process where we've partnered with Department of Homeland Security here in Kansas, so Dave Young and his staff and the Adjutant General, where we are trying to provide training out to the local governments using some grant dollars, facilitating some exercises, bringing in a third party. It's a Texas A&M Engineering Extension School is partnered with FEMA to do training on the cyber side. So we've partnered to bring some courses in with them. And again, that is also bringing in with the local governments and letting them participate as well. So yeah, a lot of success with this group. We recently partnered with, I know Sam from CISA mentioned, with CISA and KDHE to build a wastewater kind of cybersecurity training program. We're probably one of the first in the country to have that put together, and they've recently just done a bunch of those training courses this past month with those wastewater treatment operators. So that was a huge win, great partnership between multiple agencies, both at the state and federal level. So we're excited to see the progress that we're continuing to make in that space. All right. So again, as I mentioned, some of our key partnerships, DHS, CISA, there's another organization that is funded through the federal government called the Multi-State Information Sharing and Analysis Center. MS Isaac is what we call them. They share threat intel with us. We actually have a device that they sponsor that helps monitor our network, and they've got staff that are watching that. So we have kind of an overwatch capability just to check and see if they have anything that they've identified. And again, they've got feeds from all over the country, so they can see if something has popped up in another state. They can see if it's hit other states and kind of start notifying people. Another organization recently we've just got involved in is called GMIS. It's the Government Management Information Sciences organization. There is a Kansas chapter. The state has not traditionally partnered with them, but this is a lot of the local governments. So cities, counties, school districts are part of this association. A shout out to Kansas. We're transitioning out, but we are the president and vice president of the organization. I believe it was somebody from the city of Newton, Brenda Turns, and then Mike Leichert from Ellis County. We're the president and vice president. So again, partnering with them, getting embedded, and just being a resource that people can call. Our national association, so the National Association of Chief Information Officers, the National Governors Association, as I mentioned, the Kansas Intelligence Fusion Center, and the National Guard. All right, so mandatory reporting. I do want to highlight this was one of the big changes last year out of House Bill 2019 as well. What we put in there was a 12-hour reporting time frame for all public entities to report to the state of a incident that is of significant nature, i.e. it's going to affect your operations or it's going to cost your entity financially. I'll be transparent. We need to do a better job in communicating this out because I'm not sure everybody is aware of it. So that is one of the things our collaboration folks are going out and trying to message that this is a mandatory reporting. All public entities, so school districts, cities, counties are required to report, regents, institutions, things like that. And then vendors are required to report within 72 hours if they reasonably believe they've been impacted by a cyber incident. And that time frame goes down to 12 if they've confirmed that is a cyber incident that is impacting Kansas. So again, our goal with this piece is we have to defend the state network. If these vendors are doing business on the state, we also need to know if it's going to impact our ability to provide citizen services. So there was a little discussion about that last year, but we needed to make sure that if something has happened and we're not providing service, we need to kind of know why. So one, we can make sure we have appropriate messaging and be clear what is occurring. And also, again, defend the state network as well. So I think we're in a good place. We just need to do a better job messaging it out. But this will help us tell the picture of what is actually occurring in the state of Kansas from a cyber perspective. And then with that, I'll stand for questions.
All right. Does anyone have a question?
I understand that was a lot of information.
You should know that Representative Penn has one.
Sure, why not? Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, Mr. Maxson. Thank you for the presentation, both of them. Very squared away. I appreciate that. A couple of questions for you. You said that there's I think you had a KISO organization chart on there. Can we get the names of who those points of contact are in those seats and their contact information as well?
We can provide that.
Thank you. So that updated slide, if you can push that to the committee, I'd appreciate that. Also, when you talk about the IA piece and I think you said the Division of Cyber Preparedness, the concept of fighting the network, right? They do their tabletop exercises and everything like that. Is there a point in which they are involving all of the users to help fight that network?
Yep. So that's a excuse me, that's a great question. That is a combination of things. And so depending on the exercise, but it starts with the security awareness training to educate the users. If you see something suspicious, report it. And we're really focused on messaging out that reporting, if phishing can happen to everybody. The bad actors are very proficient. Generative AI is introducing new things. You can't find the misspellings or the grammatical errors like you used to. And so we want people to report as quickly as possible, and we're not going to shame them if they clicked on it. We got to move away from kind of the shaming, and we need to be transparent because the goal is to identify and respond as quickly as possible to mitigate damage. And so it's kind of the combination of that, of getting them educated and then building that culture. So it is a multi-pronged approach to build a.
Absolutely. And Madam Chair, if I may, you hit on one of the words that I was about to ask you about, culture. There has to be a shift in the culture, a paradigm shift as far as how we look at and utilize the network and devices on it. And in that regard, on the heels of Madam Chair's comment or question, what have you seen, or what could you advise the committee of with that shift, going from looking at having the confidentiality, the integrity, the accessibility of data and the network and so forth, as opposed to just the temperature in general, not talking about the executive, but just in general from what you've seen, cowardice, ignorance, and apathy for that culture shift?
Yeah, so that's a good question. And one of the big things is making information and resources available. So a lot of times, I trying to be careful how I navigate that question a little bit in terms of like going about projects with not considering security, things like that. A lot of that was making sure resources are available so as people going through those projects know there's people they can go ask to get guidance on. The past resources like that weren't available, so they just kind of went down their way, things like that. So now that resources are being made available, we're trying to communicate those out. People are coming to the resources or coming to our office asking for guidance, things like that. So again, we fight some of the same things of having resources available, things like that, but we're in a better place than we had been. And I think the messaging, the training, the things like that is slowly shifting the culture now. It's a marathon, it is not a sprint. But people seeing, one of the big things we try to do when we do training is actually do things that people can take home with them. Safe shopping. I mean, it sounds kind of silly, but safe internet shopping during the holidays, things like that. Because if you build them holistically to be safe on the internet, they'll bring that with them to work. And so trying to make sure we can bring things that might apply to them just not in the office, but outside the office. So a lot of our training is kind of geared to be across the board to include multiple aspects.
Representative Stogstill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Very interesting presentation this morning. I had a couple quick questions. It's hardly any secret that foreign bad actors are trying to access federal resources, state, county, city, school districts, all of that sort of thing. Do you see that they're trying to access Kansas resources to use as a conduit into federal resources?
So it's a mix. And so, for example, I'll use recently what was testified last week by Director Ray, the FBI. There's the ongoing People's Republic of China operation called Volt Typhoon, which is to embed into the nation's critical infrastructure for potentially disruptive operations. Again, that was something that it's not just to go after the federal government, but it's essentially they're getting into our environment to set whatever stage they want for their long-term goals. So whether it's getting to the federal government, staging for military actions to create, deny the will of the American people to get involved in things. So trying to navigate. So there is a comprehensive thing is one, both the espionage piece, trying to identify resources and track resources, to staging for operations of some sort. So it's a little bit of everything.
Okay. Just as a follow-up to that, I'm just wondering, is there any way to ascertain what Kansas resources they're specifically interested in?
That would be a better question for, depending on like Kansas government or general state of Kansas.
General state, I'm thinking of agricultural industry.
Yes.
Carolines, all that sort of thing.
Yes, so it's everything. So obviously, from Kansas perspective, again, a lot of they still are focused on intellectual property theft. We still see a lot of that. We still see gathering, whether it's on the ag, bioscience, I mean, the things like we have here in Kansas with like the MBAF, stuff like that. So we have resources that are of interest and high value to them across the board. So name the sector, and there's probably some initiative in Kansas of cyber espionage towards it.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Representative Riley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to follow up on one of your slides there. So one of them is your participation with other states in a national level. Are you doing that on a daily basis, or are you have an interlocking email that you're doing that? So if something's hitting in Washington, D.C., everybody in the United States knows that product?
Yeah, so it's a combination of all the above. So personal relationships with peers, that's one of the greatest things is so we're very open just to hit message, say, hey, we're seeing something, you might look into it. Email threads, we have our federal partners, so DHS, CISA sends out notifications, MS Isaac. So we're on email distribution groups, but it's also just knowing our peers in Missouri, Nebraska, Iowa, and say, hey, what are you guys seeing? And engaging them directly. So it is, cliche, a very tight-knit group because, again, we're all fighting the same things. And so we want to make sure we're all, as I said, whole of nation, whole of state approach.
So a follow-up question to that, not necessarily with the national kind of thing, but like last Monday, I was trying to get it into this committee, and there's a software product that we use using for our videos. And so I logged onto that before this meeting, and it wanted me to upgrade. And I guess my first question is assuming that product was a state product or a state-sponsored product, I went ahead and uploaded it, got the upgrade, and it took all day to get that product up and running on my computer, and I guess there was some other folks that had that problem too. But I noticed immediately after that, during the day, and maybe it was a coincidence, that I was starting to get some side spam mails, unidentified spam mails and phishing mails all of a sudden at the same time based on that. So could there have been any relationship, or was that a coincidence?
There's always potential of a relationship, but it could purely be coincidence too. So it's hard to tell these days, and that is the hardest and scariest thing.
All right, Representative Turner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, as I listen, it sounds like there's a lot going on in terms of trying to educate people about IT security, actual actions, staffing. It sounds like we're trying to play catch up. Is that a fair assessment?
That is a fair assessment.
And so when you mentioned HB 2019 gave the Chief Information Security Officer now can set cybersecurity policy, was that the beginning of when we were able to realize that we got a lot to get done here, or what started the path that we're currently on, which is a great path? It just seems we're late to the game. Some of the things I heard 10 years ago in the private business I worked for, so thank you.
So some of it, I think that was a culmination of multiple years for House Bill 29 to get to that ultimate kind of governance place. It did start a while back, and I think there are some challenges. Again, everybody's a little wary of somebody coming in with a hammer all of a sudden, and so it was supposed to kind of be the soft build up into it. It took longer than I think was originally planned by my predecessors. I think they're wanting to move a little bit quicker into that space because, again, this is something that it needs to be consistent across the board and not kind of that pay-to-play model. But having worked through, again, 2018, a steer financial time, hard to get resources, things like that. You want to be careful not to give an agency the responsibility but no resources. And so I think that was why it went the way it went back in 2018. And so, again, to the question about playing catch-up, I think we were playing catch-up.
Can I follow up? So now you have responsibility and resources, but do you have any enforcement ability? So
Yeah, we're still operating on goodwill from that. We did also, part of 2018 or 2019 was our ability to go in and assess agencies. For example, we didn't have legal authority to go into an agency to say, hey, I want to assess your posture. We actually now have that as well. In the past, we were, again, kind of, hey, we got an ISO, you're paying for that service, we kind of get some ability to assess, and but we had no legal way to go into an agency and say, I need to assess your posture to see if you're a risk to the state. Now getting to that where we have that capability. So, but no real, from an enforcement, but no way to like penalize noncompliance other than having conversations with the agency head or taking it to the governor's office.
So you can make recommendations,
Yes.
but there is no one. If those agency heads say, thank you for the information, I'll move
Yeah.
on, then that's the way it is.
And it would go to the governor's office after that. So there's kind of the tactic a little bit, work from the bottom and then squeeze from the top to get kind of compliance is kind of one of the approaches we've taken. But also if we identify gaps, then try and find a solution where I say, hey, this is a paid for solution. You're going to be in a pretty hard place to argue why you're not using a free service or solution that is being provided to you. So if you want to argue that and stand in front of people and say why, that's on you at that point.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome. Representative Droege.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I think this dovetails in with Representative Turner's thing. I was curious a bit about why the judicial branch took so long to tell anybody they're having a problem, or even back further when we were having problems early in the COVID stupidity that we were losing money with the workman's comp or workman's unemployment, and we don't hear anything about that. I know that, we need to have some responsibility there, but if we scare people bad enough they don't want to talk about it, they're going to protect themselves. So what I gather from most of this discussion is we've had this problem in the past, we're trying to work around it, and so we talk about all these different ways. Because we've had these problems, we want to head them off. But have we done anything meaningful? I mean, if you offer people, just like Representative Turner said, and they said, well, that's fine, we'll go on. How are we going to make this work if people can just kind of push it off because they don't want to face the responsibility?
Yes. I think that is a good question. And so, again, kind of that approach of being able to provide resources to them and get the visibility, and it is very hard for them to say no to those. I can't speak specifically for judicial. They followed the notification requirements to my office and notified me. Why they didn't specifically disclose more to the public, that is on them to decide. And being a separate branch of government, it's not in my space. And that's something also with the notification requirement, there are some confidentiality provisions because at the same time, to your point, I don't want to violate trust that they're reporting to me and then I'm getting in front of them telling everybody what has happened. So I'm trying to be very mindful of that from that perspective. And again, it is a messaging thing, kind of the analogy I use is a lot of this stuff is a crime. If somebody broke into the local courthouse and vandalized it or something, you'd see that in the news the very next day. And that would be everywhere. And even if it happened to be somebody left the door unlocked, things like that would still be in the news. Why we're not there with cyber incidents, I don't know. And that's where we're trying to change the culture of being a little more transparent. Now, there are some legitimate concerns. If it is a ransomware attack, you may be negotiating with the bad actor and you don't want to tip your cards into what you know or how much you are available to, but it's a balancing act that we need to work through and how we notify. But same thing going back to the pandemic and the fraud with that is fraud is a whole nother aspect beyond just the cyber and breaches and things like that. But these people are coming with legitimate information they've stolen from other places. And so it is truly a national problem that impacts us. And so, but again, how do we message that so it is clear, accurate, and available to the citizens to understand what's going on is a challenge we're fighting and trying to harmonize how we do that so we can be as transparent as a government as we can. So, and it's a culture change. So trying to work through those processes. So.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
Representative Penn.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for the second recognition. Sir, my colleagues have brought up some very good points, and it's generated a little bit of thought. When you were talking about how everyone is stovepiped, if you will, across agencies, across the legislature and everything from your design, the responsiveness that we can have, the ability to actually get after the problem, to resolve it, all those things are kind of distended, if you will. When we talk about UDCs, unauthorized disclosures of information, or CDVs, cross-domain violations, if information is going from one spot to another, or phishing attacks, or whatever it might be, those are opportunities not only to disclose information, as we talked about last week, but also put the government into ransomware situations and really shut down operations at the end. I guess my biggest question to you is, legislatively, do you see anything, could you recommend to us anything that your colleagues have talked about? Is there a way for us to make this more palatable, more efficient? Are there any conversations going on about that, either blowing out and extending the network, the domain, the enterprise, if you will, but also the governance of it, so that if a violation or if something is detected, is it more preventable if we, get everything together? What do you see happening in that realm, and what can we do to help?
Yeah, thank you for that. That's a good question, sir. From a perspective of continuing to build on our governance structures that exist in Kansas, we periodically hit lulls in really trying to make sure we are setting policies that are appropriate for the time frame and setting structures in place with those policies. So, for example, data governance is huge. How do we collect data from the citizens, maintain it securely, maintain their privacy, but use it to provide them the services that we're required to provide? And so, again, getting a handle on governance, starting with policy and getting people to kind of come on board with policy. And again, it's partnering between all the branches, partnering with LPA as they do their assessments to identify things. And again, there's some of the nuances with that and stuff, but kind of identifying those pieces. But how are we managing that data and sharing it between agencies? Again, we don't want to keep 85 copies of data. That just increases our exposure risk. We want to minimize our amount of data. So we're only using the bare basics. And it's starting those conversations is the big first step that we haven't done over the years. Again, it had to do with the austere environment. It sounds like an excuse, but there are realities too. We are playing catch up because of that. Introducing the new technologies that let us leverage the data we have, as opposed to just collecting more and more data because we think we need to, when in most cases we already have it. There are some statutes that only allow certain data to be shared between agencies based on their function of collecting it. Obviously, we get federal data. In most cases, if we can't share the data we get from Fed between agencies, each agency is specific. And so it's just getting a handle on our data. And I think that's the big start, is leveraging the existing structures we have. I do think there's some stuff that can be done to kind of strengthen ITech, maybe a little bit with the membership, so we can get some more perspective in there, and also maybe broaden some of the relationships with like school districts, things like that. But I do think some of the core structures and tenets are there from a governance structure, but we have not really capitalized on it over the years. But I think that's the place to start.
Yes, ma'am, and yes, sir, and Madam Chair, if I may go in again, I see the network as an organism, living and breathing, right? And if you have one agency or one branch or whatnot that has exposure, they can't stovepipe it, hide the boo-boo, if you will. You gotta uncover it so we can get the balm on it, and because we're all interconnected as we talk about the Internet of Things. And that one inject point, that one point of ingress that a bad actor might have can extrapolate out across the entire network and shut it down. So when I'm not a big government guy by any means, but when I'm talking about the network that affects the entirety of government for the safety of the people's information, but also for the functioning of their government, I wonder if there's talks or anything like that down the line about putting that authority chain in a more manageable fashion. Because I don't think that it's incumbent upon the governor's office, if that's not necessarily the governor, whoever that might be, that's not their bailiwick. You can't hold them responsible for intrusion, detection, prevention, and mitigation. That's not what they do personally. So we should have a subject matter expert, forgive the analogy, folks, but Lord of the Rings, my kids are reading it, so it's in my head, front of mine. One ring to rule them all so that we can actually be efficient with this. I understand everyone has their footprint, but if we're talking about network governance and enterprise governance, there may be some efficiencies that we're missing to actually get after this. To Representative Turner's point, we're behind the ball. The bad guys are always acting for it because they know that the political scene is always going to trail. So I would appreciate some advisement to help us get at least catch up to the ball, if not get in front of it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Representative Riley.
Yes, just a follow-up comment to Representative Penn's comments there. And so, in your opinion, do we need to tighten up that 12-hour window to a 2-hour window? Would that help of getting notifications so that you guys are on top of this a little more? Thank you.
Thank you for that question, sir. 12 is actually probably one of the most stringent out there already. So most of the other states are already at like 72 hours for the reporting. We struggled with that 12. It might be a push in terms of pushback from local governments to get it down to 2 hours. We would gladly have conversations out there about tightening it down. We have some requirements with our federal partners, for example, which it is 60 minutes to notify them of a suspected incident. 60 minutes, so an hour for some of our federal partners that we have to notify them. But some of it is also, we do know that some of these local governments don't have the resources, so they might not even know they've had an incident until they come in 18 hours later or come in over the weekend and show up. And so, we'd love to get in a place where everybody's just telling us as soon as they know. But again, it's changing that culture, and we don't want to shame people in the process. Tell us. Our first call is to say, hey, what do you need? What help do you need? I can get you some phone numbers. I can try and point you to maybe a peer or a county next to you to see if they can help out, things like that. So our goal is call us. We're not going to shame you. We're going to try and assist and offer what we can do to help best we can. But it's changing that culture. So it's just a free flow of information.
Representative Carpenter.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to switch gears a little bit on you and change the topic just a little bit here. But as we went into the executive session, one of the things that I thought about was, we turn off the mics, we have everybody leave the room, but we all still have these. So, I think we all know that foreign actors are trying to get onto these. They're trying to get anywhere that they can. So we're still sharing information even though we still have listening devices in our pockets that they could probably already have access to. So I guess my question to you is, should we look at a policy moving forward in the future as far as Faraday bags or something along those lines whenever committees, not just this one, but any committee goes into an executive session? Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Appreciate it. That is a good question. And again, I think it comes into kind of a risk mitigation, the level of risk and what is being discussed. I would probably support something like that, knowing that that's how we deal with most everything. I'm pretty sure you all have ads now about cybersecurity when we walk out of here, since we talked about it, because it seems like they listen to stuff. That is a real concern. To the extent of what those companies are sharing, that is a good question as well, but I would support something like that based on topic.
Okay, I have a couple questions. One is, do you require background checks for everyone who works in your office?
Yeah, appreciate that, Madam Chairwoman. Yes, so as a condition of employment, everybody that works for OITS does have to go through a fingerprint background check, which does require a national criminal background check.
Okay, drug tests as well?
Drug tests are not part of it.
And then I wanted to kind of move on and see if you have any ideas about restricting somewhat AI in instances. Have you all been thinking about that?
Yep. So thank you for that question. So we were one of probably the first states to actually set an initial AI policy from the executive branch side. Knowing that it is the future, we're already behind the 8 ball again on it, on technology. And so we've been using machine learning as kind of what their predecessor name was, or AI, for actually a while within especially the cybersecurity space, because as I mentioned, we go through a lot of logs. We can't do that manually. We have to have tools that look for the changes and patterns and things like that. But we were one of the first states to kind of start setting some guardrails when we look into that about not making any final decisions. You know, we're getting ready to revise that policy again, where you probably need to cite if you're using any sort of generative AI tool for any of your things. Vendors need to disclose if they're using generative AI tools. And I'm going through a blank on that, but really the crux of it is not making any final decision. Some human element needs to be in that, and not letting the computer make the decision, or the big cruxes, and kind of what we're seeing is the guardrail that everybody else is setting in that perspective.
Excellent. Are there any other questions at this time? We might let you off the hot seat. Thank you for being here. We appreciate your efforts for us, and we'll continue to visit, won't we?
Thank you.
I did want to make a comment about enforcement, because that's one of the things that we are working on within the legislation that we're working on. And we'll get that all to you as soon as possible. Wednesday, we have Katrin Osterhaus. Why I have stumble on that, it's so easy. She's going to come, and we'll have an executive session regarding audits for different groups that have other people don't know about. So that'll be fun. Starting the meeting, we're going to change the agenda. We'll start with a bill hearing for HB 2614 and HB 2615. Those are from the Secretary of State's office. They, yes, HB 2614 and 2615 were the bill numbers. They're, yes, we'll have that before we go into session with Katrin. And 2614 is, I'm not sure this is spelled right, regarding state agencies to provide a public notice of reputation of administration rules. And HB 2615 is an enormous thing that they've been asking for, is to only print the statute books if someone wants them. So instead of ordering 165 plus everyone in the building, we will have to, this bill would make it so they have to ask for it. Apparently, and they will tell you this Wednesday, that they throw away dumpsters full of statute books that people don't want. So now we need to have a formal request with this bill in order to, that was one of the things we talked about. Less paper, let's not waste a bunch of stuff, so it's perfect for this committee, in my eyes. Is there anything else to come before the meeting? If not, the bill introductions will be tomorrow, or Wednesday. All right. Why? For introductions. And I can't have hearings? I thought you told me I could have a hearing Wednesday. No, that I do know, so we'll have a hearing for it. Okay, everyone scares me so much when they all come back at that. Anyway, thank you all for being here. Thank you for your participation, and this meeting is adjourned.